You had, of course, another big issue for you. It's something you've been campaigning on, working towards, is the immigration issue. There's been talk of reform. Some in your own party have suggested that the methods you're suggesting will not work, too costly to get them all out of here. We need to look at some amnesty opportunities, although they don't seem to want to use that exact terminology, but they're suggesting to that purpose. What are your thoughts? Where are we at with that? And do you still feel confident that your plan is the best plan going forward?
I'm confident that my plan is the best plan going forward. If I were not, then I'd change it. But first I want to lay out what that is. And the first thing is we have to stop the bleeding at the border. And I know that Congressman Phil Gingrey, who's also a medical doctor, has said one day in one of our debates, he said, when you're working in the emergency room and they wheel somebody in on the gurney and they're bleeding all over the floor, the first thing you do is not grab the mop and the bucket and start to clean the floor. You stop the bleeding. And when they stabilize the patient, and then you start to clean up things after that's all done. Well, we need to do the same thing at our border. We've got huge bleeding at the border, and those that say that those numbers are down, and those that say that the president's deportations are up, they're wrong on both of those counts. That's not an honest answer. The president is double counting, and he essentially admitted that on those deportations at the border. And with the numbers that you can look at to measure are there more or less drugs coming across the border? And there's at least as many, and the quality of them are higher, and the price is a little bit cheaper. So that says that we're not suppressing illegal drugs coming across the border effectively. Second one is we've had people that have been dying in the desert sneaking into America for years. Is that number going up or down? And it's a human tragedy. That number is going up, not down. It's approaching 500 people over the last year, and now we have to look at people that are dying in Texas and in greater numbers than they used to, and probably a few less numbers in Arizona. So stop the bleeding at the border. We need to enforce the law domestically. When our local law enforcement personnel encounter people that are unlawfully present in the United States, they need to have the authority, and they need to be expected to enforce the law. And here we are, the federal government subsidizing billions of dollars to sanctuary cities that announce that they're actually going to interfere with the enforcement of federal immigration law. They should be cooperating with, and instead, the mayor of New York, de Blasio, announced the other day, we're going to embrace people that are here illegally into the city of New York. Those things, we need to have domestic enforcement, stop the bleeding at the border. Once we restore the respect for the rule of law, then we can have the conversation about the people that are here illegally. And if we do this some other way, then what we've done is we've decided that the rule of law, at least with regard to immigration, no longer matters. And you cannot be a great country if you don't have respect for the rule of law. When the law exists, it needs to be enforced. If it's going to be changed, Congress is what needs to change it, not the president in a unilateral and unconstitutional way. And so that's the policy that I would bring. And it doesn't have to do with going out and looking for people. It's when you encounter them, you have an obligation to enforce the law. Under the Senate Gang of Eights legislation, or the Speaker's proposal of his principles, which would encompass all of the Senate Gang of Eights legislation, they instead advocate for perpetual and retroactive amnesty. In other words, if you haven't committed a violent crime, they wouldn't enforce the law against you at all. And their new policy would be anybody that has ever gotten into America and is in America, unless they've committed a violent felony, gets to stay. And it implies that anybody that could get into America after the implementation of their bill would also get to stay. And furthermore, it sends an invitation to those out who have been deported, which is, I call it the "we really didn't mean it" clause, which says, why don't you come back and reapply, we'll bring you into the United States, if we deported you in the past, we'll bring you in. Now, you cannot be a country that lets everybody else decide your immigration policy. Every nation has a policy that's designed to enhance their well-being. And I've long said, our immigration policy needs to enhance the economic, social, and cultural well-being of the United States of America. It needs to preserve the rule of law. And if we don't do that, and we can do it with respect for every human person, and because which they're deserving, but we can do that. But if we don't restore this rule of law now, the rule of law will be destroyed instead of restored, for at least with regard to immigration, and we would not be able to restore the rule of law again within the lifetime of this republic. It's that serious Protecting the rule of law is the most important component of this. And those who advocate for open borders and amnesty, almost universally Democrats support it because they know that they gain political power, that they get more representation in every branch of government if they get more people here that are legalized, or even if they're here illegally, they're counted in the census. They've already got representation in Congress. So Democrats have a political leverage on this. I understand their motives, and I accept that they're not going to change their mind, even though they're altruistically very wrong. Republicans, on the other hand, some of them seem to be wanting to join with the Democrats, and there's no rational reason for that, since their policies that are proposing, the open borders policy, they're bad for America, they're bad for American workers, and down the list of ways it's also bad for Republicans and Independents and Democrats if they just admitted it.
Okay, a couple, I know you've got to get going, and I got a couple more real quick questions. One, is there any other issues that are hot button issues for you going on in Washington right now?
Well, I'd say we just finished the Farm Bill, so we can take that off the urgent part of it, and we've been at that for 3 years. I'm glad we have one done. I'm glad our producers have the now 5 years of predictability to operate with, and they'll be able to manage their operations a lot better. One of the things that I'll continue to focus on is my amendment that passed in the House on the Farm Bill that wasn't included in the final version of the bill, and it is, we call it the PICA Amendment, the Protect Interstate Commerce Amendment. And what it does is it clarifies the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. California has passed legislation that bans any eggs, shelled eggs, from coming into California unless they are laid by hens in cages the size that are specified by the Humane Society of the United States, which wrote the California law. And the Constitution says that interstate commerce is the sole province of the United States Congress. It is an enumerated power. And yet California, regulating the means of production, has provided trade protectionism for their producers in their state who are subject to a bad law in California. Now, I'd argue that Californians are free to regulate their producers and over-regulate them. They're even free to regulate them out of business if they choose. But they're not free to regulate producers in the other 49 states. And so my amendment not being included in the final version of the Farm Bill doesn't mean that that's a moot point at this point. That's going to go forward, and we're going to bring new strategies. Litigation has already started. The Attorney General of Missouri has filed suit against California on these very constitutional grounds. So that's something you'll see me working on with a focus. But I'd say also it's important to think about where this country is going and the principles and the precedents that are being established by this administration. And the country's in a precarious position now because the separation of powers doctrine has been dramatically altered by the unilateral executive actions of President Obama. And it isn't always executive orders. It's sometimes he will change a policy by press conference because the president has spoken, the insurance companies line up to try to follow. Then he calls them into the White House. He might do it before he makes the announcement, and says to them, well, if you lose money, we've got the risk corridors here, we'll bail you out, we'll take care of you. This president has stretched this Constitution. He's gone beyond it. And the people in this country need to understand and need to protect this separation of powers. Congress writes the laws, the president enforces the laws, the judicial branch interprets the laws. And right now the president is in the position where he seems to think he is in control of Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution. We're going to need to protect our Constitution, and we need to have a historical, cultural memory of what made this country great, make sure our children learn it right. That's the biggest, most important thing, and I think that'll be a central theme in the upcoming presidential election for 2016.
Okay, last question, I'll keep it quick. I know that you, in the past, have been kind of a thorn in the side of the left. Now you're starting to get some members of your own party that are upset with what they term the harsh rhetoric of the strong right. How do you address the critics in your own party?
Well, the first thing would be they cannot make a point about anything I've said that was anything other than true. So if they're critical, I just remember I was in a debate at Iowa State University back when I was a state senator, and it was about same-sex marriage. And one of the people in the crowd went to the microphone and he said, why don't you just become progressive and get with it like Holland is? They have same-sex marriage there. Why don't you just embrace, that's where the modern world is going, and emulate Holland? And I said, well, you're asking me to emulate Holland why would I want to emulate Holland? And he said, well, why wouldn't you? And I said, well, because they have euthanasia and abortion and legalized drugs and prostitution. And when I said that, he gasped into the microphone. And I said, what's the matter? It's true, isn't it? And he kind of whimpered and he said, but you didn't have to say it that way. Is it really true that we're to this point in our society where now if you disagree with someone, you don't have the argument that you can disagree. You have to instead call names and criticize the utilization of the language. Let's get to the substance of the matter. And I'll stand on the principles that I've laid out. And sometimes I've made the point for years and they weren't listening, so I found another way to get them to pay attention. And for example, Dick Durbin, as far as I know, no longer describes the Dreamers as valedictorians. We've corrected that major flaw, and sometimes we have to, otherwise it distorts the public's understanding. So I'm not going to apologize. What I've said is objectively true, and any time that Republicans have criticized me, it's not because of what I said, it's because they disagreed with my agenda. And that's really the answer. And when they start calling names, they've lost the debate.
Congressman, always appreciate your time. Thanks for being here in Spencer. Enjoy Ag Outlook, and we'll talk to you again soon.
I will. Thank you, Randy.